So how many stories, sermons, Bible classes do you think you've been a part of that featured our read for this week from Genesis chapters 5 through 9 and the story of Noah on the ark? 5, 10, 100. I was looking back through my notes. I think I've probably preached sermons, different ones on Noah, maybe 5 different sermons throughout the years, just kind of rebooting them. And generally, when we study Noah, even if you've heard it a great many times, usually there are 2 people in focus. A sermon on Noah is focused on 2 people. One is Noah, and the other one is you. Our usual approach, and it's a good approach, is to look at passages like Hebrews chapter 11, verse 7, and basically say, look at Noah. Here was a good guy. He was a righteous man. He was an obedient man. He was a patient man. And because of his faith, because of what he did, he was blessed by God. We read verses like this. By faith, Noah, being warned by God about things not yet seen, in reverence, prepared an ark for the salvation of his household, by which he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. If you have studied this story to try to find out what did Noah do right and how do I need to be more like him, that's an excellent study. That's exactly what Hebrews chapter 11 verse 7 is inviting you to do. I've preached several sermons where I just took all the commas here and made different points after each one all the way through. It's usually about Noah and you. Now, I do think we've improved on that a little bit in recent years. We've studied passages like this and at least started out with the fact that God's grace led this thing, which I think is really great. To at least go, it was actually God that decided to step out and start this. But generally, it's about us. Now, here's what I want you to see. That would be categorized in this way. Well, what's Noah about? What's the Christian story? It's the story of how God comes to us by grace, offers us a chance, we obey for 100 years, and we're saved. Great stuff. Not going to say a negative thing about it, but here's my suggestion tonight. This should be the third thing you do with this story. For most of us, it's the only thing we do with this story. It's Noah and me. I need to be like him. But this should probably be third on your list. There are 2 other things going on in the story found in Genesis, where I'd love for you to go, in Genesis 5 through 9, that are at least as important as this, and probably more so. And yet maybe we don't talk about it enough. So what we're going to do is look back at the story, except maybe check out a couple of other characters first who are a little bit more important than Noah and me and Noah and you, and then see if we can derive some benefit. Here's the first thing I want you to see. I was reading it this week, by the way. Where does this sermon come from? I'm just reading it this week, and I noticed that Noah is a player in this story, but he is not the central figure of it. So before we look at him, my first suggestion to you is that what you're reading in the book of Genesis is God's story. You're reading the story of an amazing, all-powerful, wonderful creator who did terrific, perfect, beautiful work. And from the moment he was finished with that work, his creation began to defile the good things that he had done. The story of Noah is a story of the pain that God felt when he looked at people and saw what they did with his blessings. It is also the story of how that pain manifested in wrath and anger against ungodliness and sin, and ultimately there's this great message of hope. And I want you to see that first tonight. See God first. I mean, think about it this way. Go back to Genesis 1. His story doesn't start with an ark. God's story starts in the beginning. But, we talk about how the Torah, the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, were written by Moses, and they were handed over to the children of Israel before they entered into the land of Canaan. So he's basically like, imagine if this is the first 5 books. He's like, all right, guys, I'm not going in. God's going to take me. When you get in there, we want things to go well. So here, take these 5 books and read them over and over and over again. And sure, he wanted them to go in there and go, how can we be more like Noah? Yeah, sure he did. Sure he did. But much more importantly than that, they needed to understand the God whom they served when they entered into that land. If they were going to live out their covenant with God the right way, the promises of God in their life the right way, then they needed to study the nature of the Lord. And so my primary question for you tonight is, do you know the nature of your Lord? I go back to the beginning in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 31. Just think about it from God's perspective. God, the creation's taking place and he's making everything. And in Genesis 1:31, God saw all that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed. All their hosts were completed. By the seventh day, God completed his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all the work which he had done. And he blessed the seventh day and onward and so forth, and rested from all the work that he had done. That's the way humanity begins. It is God stepping in saying, I'm going to create this beautiful, perfect thing. It's going to be very good. And I'm just going to rest from all that I had done. But it didn't take long. Chapter 3, verse 13. It did not take long. You want to know what man's part in the story is? We read man's part and go, these men are so faithful and I want to be like them. Look, what we find with men is that men falter and they fail, and God's good plan is tarnished. In chapter 3 and verse 13, the Lord said to the woman, what is this you have done? What had she done? She had defiled the will of God and the goodness that he had created, and Adam as well, and introduced sin and consequences into the world. I think it's really great. Don't overlook it. Chapter 3, verse 15. You want to know a little bit about God's story? You're going to see his pain in a minute. You're going to see what God feels when the people he made in his image sin against him. You see a little bit of it in the Adam and Eve stage. You're going to see some of the anger. But God's hope was always sown into the plan. In Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, we quote this a lot. I'll put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed, he said to Satan. He shall bruise you on the head, but you shall bruise him on the heel. God is always working. How do I redeem these people? How do I make things right again? You know the nature of our Lord? Here it is. He makes everything perfect. We come in and make it imperfect. And he strives to find the next opportunity to make it right again. That's your God. That's the God whom you and I serve. Now, I think it's interesting that in verse 21, for instance, of Genesis chapter 3, even though he is angry and he seeks to punish them for their sin, he still makes provisions for them, which shows his tender-heartedness. Chapter 3, verse 21, he made garments of skin for Adam and his wife. It's interesting that the only way to cover for their shame was for an animal to die. That may have been the first animal that died. Had to die so that their skin could provide cover. And so God provides all this. Now we move forward, and here's what happens when we get to our story in chapter 6. What happens is sin gets worse and worse and worse. And it spreads throughout all humanity after Cain kills Abel and all of the families are started. And here's God watching everything he made to be good. He's watching it all fall to pieces. And I think it's an exhibition, just to put a couple of points up here as we move along, I think it's an exhibition of his patience, verse 3. In Genesis 6, verse 3, the Lord said, my spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he also is flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. You know, they used to live to be what? 900 and something? 969, 930. It's almost like God is saying, I am trying really, really hard to hang in there with you guys. I'm trying to keep this thing going. I'm trying to find hope. I'm trying to strive with you. God wants to strive with you, but all you do is mess up. So instead of getting rid of everyone, I'll just make sure I don't have to look at you quite so long. So what happens is, and this took time, by the way. It didn't all happen like this guy was 900, the next guy was 120. But by the time we get down to the days of, say, Moses lived to be 120 years old. So he's basically saying, I'm going to try to stay patient with you, and I think I'll just only give you 100 years or so, and maybe that'll help. But it didn't change things. If you'll notice with me in chapter 6, verse 5, you want to know this whole lesson tonight is because I was sitting there earlier this week reading Genesis 6, and I read verses 5, 6, and 7. Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was on evil continually. The Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. The Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, from man to animals to creeping things to the birds of the sky, for I am sorry that I have made them. Maybe it won't be the same for you because you're listening to a guy get up here and tell you to think about it. But that hit me so heavy this week that God made so many good things. He made us to be good. He gave so many blessings. And he looks at man just ripping it all to pieces. And he doesn't start with, I'm mad at them for disobeying me. He said, I'm sorry that I made them. You want to know what sin does to God? You want to know what it means to God for him to make everything good for you and me and then watch us just throw it in the ditch? It makes him sorry that he even made the effort and has grief in his heart, and he is grieved. And as a result of that heaviness of heart, it turns to anger, and it turns to wrath, and it turns to punishment. Sin hurts God. If you get nothing else out of the Genesis story, you can go out and build an ark if you want. It'll take you a very, very long time. And you've got to build your own faith arks. But the number one thing you need to get out of this story is how God feels when we sin. And the depths of the emotional impact of God watching us make decisions based on what he has said. And so in the text he said, I'm going to have to punish them and wipe them out. But what's interesting to me in verses 8 and 9 is he just can't quite give up on us. This is God's nature. His nature is, I'm grieved, I'm broken, I'm going to wipe it all out. But there's something about God that's just looking for anything. And I want you to think about yourself. Now, you want to put yourself in this story? Think about yourself in this way. When we sin, it makes him greatly sorrowful. And he should have wiped you out a long time ago. But he's just so hopeful that he's looking for anything. And so Noah, just one guy out of probably millions of people, one guy finds favor in the eyes of the Lord. Verse 9, these are the records of the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his time. Noah walked with God. And so in the midst of all of this, God is still looking to make it right. He's still looking to move past his sorrow. He lets it turn into anger and wrath and punishment. And you can see why, because he's devastated by what man has done to his goodwill. But he's always looking for some way. But it was not God's intention. I think this is a big issue about God people have. It's like, man, how could God wipe everybody out? And how could he end families? And what kind of God does that? I'll tell you what kind of God does that. A very emotional God. A God who has the right to be honored because he did all of this. And sometimes, verse 11, the earth becomes corrupt in the sight of God and it's filled with violence. And God looks down on the earth and it's corrupt, for all the flesh have corrupted their way on the earth. And God said to Noah, he said, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. And behold, I'm about to destroy them with the earth. Is he just destroying the earth because he's mad at it? He's destroying the earth because it's filled with sin, and there's no good left in it. God does not destroy out of some bitterness. God is moved to punish out of sadness. And where there is sin, and where sin has taken up residence, destruction is the only outcome. In chapter 7, he does so in verses 23 and 24, and I just thought about it. It was the next day I was reading it, thinking about what this must have looked like to God. Noah builds the ark. We'll talk about Noah in a minute, but he builds the ark. He's obedient, and he takes care of what God told him to. And so he gets on the ark. And verse 23 says, then God, this is God's story of how he's processing all this. He blotted out every living thing that was upon the face of the land. He blotted out man, whom he had made in his image. He blotted out animals, the creeping things, the birds of the sky. They were blotted out from the earth, and only Noah was left, together with those who were with him in the ark. And the water prevailed for 150 days, and they were on there for about a year. There's a verse that comes right after that is interesting. I mean, you're already there. Just move to chapter 8, verse 1. But here's how I see this. I see God staring at all of this. And how do you think he feels? No question, he has felt sorrow and anger and some sense of hope, but he is staring at all of what he made and watching what sin has done to it. And I almost see him in sort of a trance as he looks at it, just enamored. Because verse 1 says, but God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the cattle that were with him in the ark. Now, you're going to need this in a minute when we get to the second half of this lesson. But he's looking at it going, well, this is the way it's going to have to go. There is sin, there is death, there is destruction. I hate it. I never wanted it. And look at what is happening. But then he remembered Noah, my one hope for the people. Noah is still floating along obedient, and those who are connected with him, hope kind of floats along. And so afterwards in chapter 8 and verse 15, God kind of rebuilds Eden a little bit. You know, you think about Adam in the beginning. He makes Adam and Eve. He says, look, it's perfect. I made it beautiful and perfect. And all I want for you is good things. So go live in that garden and enjoy it and just choose me. They chose wrong. Everything fell apart. Well, now when you get to chapter 8, verse 15, this is kind of like God going, hey, let's do it again. Let's start over. That's what sin demanded. It's been devastating for me, but let's start over. And so in chapter 8, verse 15, God spoke to Noah saying, all right, now you go out of the ark, you and your wife, your sons' wives, bring out with you every living thing and all the flesh and the birds and the animals. And it's the same thing he told Adam. I want you to breed abundantly on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. So Noah went out and they went with him, and all the beasts went out and went with him. And Noah built an altar to the Lord and took of every clean animal and every clean bird and offered a burnt offering to the Lord. The Lord smelled the soothing aroma, and the Lord said to himself, I will never again curse the ground on earth of man, for the intent of man's heart is evil from his youth, and I will never again destroy every living thing. Now that verse is difficult too. Here's what it's almost like he's saying. I created you for us to be in perfect fellowship. I'll do everything in the world for you, and you just obey me. Well, that didn't work. And no matter how patient God was, it never worked. It got worse and worse and worse and worse. And so he destroyed everything. Then he finds hope in one man, and he starts kind of rebuilding. He says, let's start this over. And it's almost like God saying, all right, we'll do this a little bit differently this time. This time, I kind of am owning this idea that man has evil in his heart. In other words, it's going to get bad again. It's going to get, this whole idea that we just don't sin is not going to happen. It's going to get bad again. So this time I will make a covenant that I will not destroy the world in that way again. And I just have to wonder how often our God is sorry that he made that covenant. Have you thought about that? He made a covenant. God makes a covenant, it's a covenant. I'm not going to do that again. We're not going to do another redo here on earth. We're going to start a new garden again. And so he made that. And I'll tell you why I think that he had to remind himself, because of chapter 9. Look in chapter 9. This covenant, by the way, emerges, and that's very important. We'll see later that he set up a covenant with Noah that would affect everybody associated with Noah. He said, I'm not going to do that again. And then when you get to chapter 9, we look at the rainbow. Now, before you read about the rainbow, what is the purpose of the rainbow? This is a Bible class. I said, why did God set up a rainbow? You'd say it's a reminder. Yeah, but who is it a reminder to? Was it a reminder for Noah to go, oh yeah, he makes sure I do what God said? Was it a reminder for us that, oh yeah, God's not going to flood the earth? The text does not say it was a reminder to us. The text says it was a reminder to God. Have you ever even thought about a God who needed a reminder? Who kind of broke his trance of watching all humanity flood and die and like goes, oh yeah, Noah. I don't think God is short-sighted. I think it's telling you something about God. It's saying there would be times when man would be so deep in sin. We talk about our nation now and our world, so that it just hurts. And I hate it, and I want to stop it, and it's awful. But I will remember. Let me show you in case you're not sure about this. In chapter 9, he starts this covenant, verse 8. He spoke to Noah and his sons, and he said, I will establish my covenant with you and with everybody who's associated with you and your descendants after you. And so every human being is born out of Noah and enjoys this. And with every living creature, all the birds, the cattle, the beasts, I'm going to make a covenant, verse 11, with you that I will never do this again. We're going to start an agreement. He said, this is the sign of the covenant, verse 12, which I am making between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all generations. I set, verse 13 of chapter 9, my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a sign of a covenant between you and me. It shall come about when I bring a cloud over the earth that the bow will be seen in the cloud, and I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. And never again shall the water become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the cloud, then I will look upon it, God said, to remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. And God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant which I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth. It's a great story about faithfulness and doing what is right. But would you please, the next time you read through, if you're reading through Genesis, would you spend some time thinking about all of this from God's perspective? You know what I learned from this when I think about it? I learned from this that God is good and makes all things good and does not want to destroy anything. God seeds hope into all of his creation, from every living soul in this room to the nature and the world around us. He created it to be good, and he seeds hope. And what destroys it is sin. But there can be so much sin that it destroys his heart, that it hardens his heart, that it hurts his heart, and that he grieves it and that he responds. And so it's just changed my attitude about sin. We've got to get past this me-centered stuff. You know what? I shouldn't sin tomorrow because I don't want to go to hell. Is that the reason you're not going to sin tomorrow? Or is it because you serve an amazing God who is an emotional God, who deserves to be honored and obeyed, who gave us all a fresh start when we didn't deserve it, and we haven't even talked about the real fresh start just yet that you also didn't deserve? I want to serve a God of faith, one who is emotional with that which is good and right. And so, consider God. This is his story, not ours. Here's the second thing. Noah is probably more akin to someone else than he is to you. Just raise your hand if this applies to you. God accomplished the redemption of the many through the one. Raise your hand if that's you. Where are you? Show me, who's our Noah, who God was angry at the whole world, and sin was everywhere, and sin demanded death and consequences, and he was about to give up on everyone, except he seeded this one hope in one person in the whole world. He found one righteous person. Where are you? Is that you? Did that person come to church tonight? And he said, I will save everyone through one person. Folks, Noah's not me, and I'm not him. This is another Jesus story. This is a story about our Messiah. Hey, we're going to build our boats, all right? We're going to spend our lives obeying. We're going to head back to Hebrews 11. We're going to become preachers. But I'm going to tell you that Jesus did the building, and Jesus became the preacher, and all hope first came through him. When we talk about the story, we talk about Jesus. This is true all the way through. You know, the Bible talks about Adam. Adam brought life to a sinless world, and then the book of Romans says Christ is the second Adam. Adam is a Jesus story. When we talk about Moses being put in a little baby, a special born baby, put in a little, carriage, and they sought to kill him, and he became the deliverer of the nation. That's not you. That's Jesus. Moses is a shadow of the great coming of Christ. A couple weeks ago, we studied Mordecai and Esther. I'm not Mordecai or Esther, but Jesus is. And so because of him, we celebrate all that he and his courage and boldness worked on and accomplished. David, I've mentioned it to you many times. Never had anybody fight me back on this. But if there's a Goliath out there, I'm probably hiding. I'm going to work on my courage, but I don't know if I'll have it. But I'll tell you who my David is. It's Jesus. These are stories designed. And what's interesting is, even though Moses wrote them to Israel, there's this sense in which he was trying to seed the ideas of Jesus into them. It's kind of like in 1 Corinthians 10, where it talks about how when Moses walked through on the dry ground and stood on the rock on the other side, it said the rock was who? Christ. Like Jesus is a part of all of this from the very beginning. And so what I would have you consider is, when you study the story of Noah, is study the fact that it is a story of him. Let me explain. Number one, see this word right here? I don't want to insult anybody. Everybody looks so nice tonight, and you're paying such good attention. Only 4 people sleeping right now. That's a record. That's not tragedy. I don't see anyone who is righteous on their own. There's not a person in this room that God could look down and go, you know what? That person's righteous. I think I'll save the whole world through them. It's not you, and it's not me. In fact, Romans 3 goes far and away out of its way to say there are none righteous, not even one. But when the Genesis story begins, go back with me to Genesis chapter 6. I'm talking about the flood story. In chapter 6, verses 8 and 9, it said that Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. So it's kind of like Noah was righteous. Then God comes in and says, I think we can build an entire covenant around that. I think who you are, which is unique to everybody else in the world, might just be different enough that we can formulate a new plan that benefits everyone who is associated with you. And verse 8 says he found favor, and then verse 9, Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his time. Noah walked in fellowship with God. He was righteous when the world was not. He walked with God when the world did not, and he obeyed God with his life when no one else would. Who is that? That is our Savior and our King, Jesus. You might hold your finger here. We certainly will need to come back, but go over with me to Romans chapter 4. Romans chapter 4. We've studied already a bit this week in Romans, but I mentioned to you already in Romans 3 and verse 10, there's none righteous, not even one. And so if I'm trying to find salvation from the sin of this world and the sorrow of God on my own, I'm not the character through which it can happen. None are but one. And so when you get to chapter 4, and you read about that which came through Christ, you see that there's this great promise in chapter 3 that righteousness would come through Christ, that it would be his righteousness on display throughout this text. As you pick up in chapter 4 and all the way through to being credited as righteousness, it came through the coming and the perfection. I'm looking for my verse right now. There's righteousness marked all over. But it came through Christ. You look at like verse 26 of chapter 3. His righteousness, he became just and a justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. He was the only one who could have done this. And so the Noah story for me is a story of thanksgiving. That chapter 3 verse 10, I am not righteous, but God might find a way to enter into a covenant with me through which I might be saved through the righteousness of Jesus and his faithfulness to stand for what was right. Second word, deliverance. Go back with me to Genesis for a moment. In Genesis, please, in chapter 7, everything, listen carefully, everything not associated with Noah perished. I want to make sure you understand that statement. We live in this world where it's like, okay, who's going to be saved in the end time when God comes back and who's not, and how central a figure is Jesus, and how important is it that it's in Jesus, and can you find salvation through anybody but Jesus? Could you have been saved through anybody but Noah? No. Was anybody righteous? No. Was there a covenant made with anyone? No. Only through Noah. And so in chapter 7, when he talks about that in verse 23, he says in chapter 7 of Genesis, he blotted out every living thing, man, animal, creeping thing, and only Noah was left together with those who were with him in the ark. God remembered Noah, and he remembered all of the animals and all of the people who were with him. This is a Jesus story. Redemption will only happen through Jesus, and only those who are associated with Jesus, only those who are with him can be saved. God is not going to make a salvation covenant with you. He's not, and we think so individualistically. God's going to come to you and go, hey, be a pretty good person, I'll take you to heaven. He's not going to do that. There's not going to be multiple covenants with individuals based on your life and how it's been for you and what you want to do. He said, I'm going to make a covenant through my Son. And everyone in a relationship with my Son will be blessed by virtue of that, and everyone outside of that will be accursed and sent away. And so it was in chapter 8 in verse 15. Noah was blessed to start a new existence, free from what was before, and ready to go out and spread the seed and multiply the earth. It says, be fruitful and multiply. And I think about Jesus. Hebrews 11 said that Noah was a preacher of righteousness, and that's what Jesus was. He came to be a deliverer of the people. In chapter 8, though, with Jesus, it's always something more, Noah gets blessed in this new covenant by God. God says, I'm going to be with you and everybody associated with you, and I want you to go out and enjoy this. And in chapter 8, Noah builds an altar, and he takes these animals, and he offers those animals, and the Lord, chapter 8, verse 21, smells that aroma, and he says, I receive it. I receive this offering. And of course, in the case of Jesus, it's never that simple, is it? Jesus is the righteous one through whom the covenant was made. He is the deliverer from death and destruction and bondage. And when it came time for an offering to be made that God might be pleased, through which God might remember his covenant and acknowledge his covenant, as always, it was nothing less than Jesus being the sacrifice who was put on the altar and put to death for us. Everyone not associated with Jesus will perish. Jesus ushered in the new age, a new life, and a new hope, and Jesus became the sacrifice. And there would never be a substitute. A word that is very dominant in this text, and I would encourage you to mark in our story, is the word covenant. We've only referenced it a little bit, but when you read through, this whole thing started with God going to Noah, a righteous man who he was walking with, and he saw favor in his eyes. And he said, verse 18, chapter 6, verse 18, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to establish a covenant with you, an agreement with you, and not only you, but everybody who's with you, your sons and your wife and your sons' wives and all the living things. But God created a covenant between them. And as you go through this text, there's more and more about that. Look in chapter 9, please. In chapter 9, verse 9, God spoke to Noah, I establish my covenant with you. Verse 11, my covenant with you. Verse 12, there's a sign for the covenant which I make. Chapter 9, verse 13, the covenant between me and the earth. Verse 15, I will remember my covenant. He says, verse 16, it's an everlasting covenant, never going to go away. I'm going to build an agreement between me and you that will last forever. The agreement was I would never flood the earth, and it was unconditional in the sense that everyone who was born after Noah would associate with him and enjoy that, the everlasting covenant. When Jesus came, he came into a world filled with sin. A world I'm sure God was very hurt to observe. Even his own people, Israel, had faltered so tremendously, and he'd punished them so he'd shortened their life a lot to try to work his way through it. But they kept sinning. Jesus comes and he says, all right, here's what I'm going to do. Through you, not only through you because of your righteousness, not only am I going to bring deliverance through you, but I will build a covenant through you. And so we go to Matthew. Go with me. We go to Matthew in chapter 26. We'll look at a couple of New Testament passages. In Matthew chapter 26, what did Jesus say when he instituted the supper that would be remembered? He said, in verse 27, drink from it all of you when he had passed the cup, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. He is the righteous one. He is the one who would be delivered. Forgiveness would be through him, and it would be through a covenant. God has made an agreement to redeem us through Jesus Christ, and it's better. Go to Hebrews. Hebrews 8 talks a lot about this. Hebrews 8, verse 6. Hebrews 8, verse 6, when Jesus came, he brought a covenant unlike anything that's ever happened before. It is a better agreement than that which was given to the garden. It is a better agreement than that which was given to Noah, even. It is a better agreement than that which was given with the nation of Israel, though it did help them greatly. He said, even of that law, this one, Christ has obtained a more excellent ministry, by as much as he is also the mediator of a better covenant, which has been enacted on better promises. Think about the comparison of the two promises. God says, Noah, I'm going to make a covenant with you. It's got this amazing promise. Well, what is it? I'm not going to flood everybody again. That's okay. Well, that's, it's pretty good. Maybe, some salvation would be nice or some blessings. Like, you know what? That's the best I can do right now. The best I can do is I'm not going to flood everybody. When it gets bad, I'm going to expect that, and I'm going to kind of get myself in a place to receive that, and I'm going to do this. When Christ comes and makes a covenant, the covenant is, I won't destroy you. But it's more. It is that, but it's more. The covenant isn't just that. The covenant is, I will restore you. I will redeem you. I will forgive you. Aren't you glad you don't have to be Noah in order to be forgiven? This righteous, pious, strong, one-of-a-kind worker. I want to be like Noah, but I serve Jesus. He is my Noah, and I have this covenant that's better. Here's what's better about it, verse 12. I will be merciful to their iniquities, and I will remember their sins no more. This time he's not going to wash. He doesn't wash everybody away when they sin. He washes the sin from everybody when they submit to him, which I like a lot better. I'm a bigger fan of that. He washes the sin away for those who are with him. Do you understand how blessed we are? That Jesus is your Noah. That his righteousness got used to create a pathway of deliverance for you. But it's not just some thing where you just decide it's cool. It's a covenant. You have to associate with Christ and associate with the covenant, the new covenant that was built. That means law. That means instruction. That means truth. But here's some good news about it. Chapter 13, verse 20. I found it interesting that when he set up the covenant with Noah, he said this is an everlasting covenant. And what he meant was, as long as this earth lasts in the form that it is in, it will last forever. But when Christ came, now the peace of God, chapter 13, verse 20, who brought up from the dead the great shepherd of the sheep, through the blood of the eternal covenant, even Jesus our Lord, equip you in every good thing to do his will, working in us that which is pleasing in his sight, through Jesus Christ, to whom be the glory forever and ever. Amen. That's what this story does for me. It doesn't take away from wanting to be like Noah and wanting to do well. It just changes the entire purpose behind why I want to do well. I want to do well because God is awesome. And because all he wants to do is create good situations that are wholesome and righteous, and he wants to bless them immensely. And all sin has ever done is ruined it. It has pushed his buttons, and he's got buttons. I think there's somebody in this room who needs to hear this. God's got buttons, and they're pushable. God is an emotional being, and that's all sin has ever done. I want to do his will, number one, because he is a God of peace, verse 20, and he deserves that. But also because of the great shepherd whom he raised from the dead, who created through his blood, through his suffering, an eternal covenant, equipping us to do things that please God. I'm motivated by that. If you're wondering, is there any New Testament connection kind of pulling all this together? Here's one, 1 Peter 3. In 1 Peter chapter 3, we can talk about baptism a minute, the water, the ark. 1 Peter chapter 3. The text talks about Christ, first of all, in verse 18, 1 Peter 3:18. Christ also died for sins once for all, the just for the unjust, so that he might bring us to God, having been put to death in the flesh, but being made alive in the Spirit, in which also he went and made proclamations to the spirit now in prison, who once were disobedient, when the patience of God kept waiting in the days of Noah during the construction of the ark, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were brought safely through the water. Corresponding to that, baptism now saves you, not the removal of dirt from the flesh, but an appeal to God for a good conscience through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who, and he's the real focal point here, is at the right hand of God, having gone into heaven after angels and authorities and powers have been subjected to him. Here's how I kind of read this story now. By the way, Jesus was there. Did you know that? Some of the hardest verses in the Bible. Who are these people in prison Jesus went to? Was it people on earth during the years the ark was being built? Whereas the people who were in Hades after they died? I don't know, but Jesus was a part of it. But when I look at this, here's the way it works out. Noah is the single righteous advocate through which God is going to preserve the future of the world. And so for 100 years, while Noah is building that ark, looking for gopher trees, I don't know how that worked out. What was he also doing? Hebrews 11:7. He's preaching. Noah was preaching. Noah's the preacher. Noah goes around and says, look, God is going to save everybody through this, through me, through this agreement, and through none else. And what you need to do is get on this boat and stay above the water. Well, Jesus has shown up. And he has a similar message for you. God has sent me, Jesus, to save you. I'm here to preach salvation through me in him. This time we're not going to get on a boat and float above the water. This time we're going to be buried in the water. This time, and Jesus did that. He did that first. And so we appeal to God for a good conscience, but we do it. Look, verse 21, this whole baptism thing and work thing. Was baptism a work? If you think you have to do it, are you trying to accomplish something of your own will? Look, when Noah said, I'm your Savior, get on the boat, and you got on the boat, you were doing it by faith in Noah, not because you're a great boat getter. Okay, you were just like, I'm coming. Christ comes in and he says, I am resurrected. I am at the right hand of God. I have all power. I want you to come with me. Get in the water. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? You don't do it because you're Noah building something amazing. You do it because Jesus is Noah, and he has built something amazing. And he wants you to get in with him. And that's where obedience comes in. And so as we close, look, Hebrews 11:7, y'all. Keep reading it. Don't go tell all those preachers that preached on that. You missed the boat. You were talking about the third most important thing all those years. That's what I did. But it is the third most important thing. Because it works just like this. Number one and first, when you're reading through Genesis, the number one most important thing is your great God and Maker. His story of all he has done for us, his patience, his kindness, his anger, and his hope. The second story is that over and over and over and over again, when it looked like there was never going to be a way back, God would raise up a Jesus to deliver them. A David, a Moses, an Abraham, an Esther, or in this case, a Noah. Now, what's interesting about that is Noah just blows it, right? Anybody know the rest of Noah's story? Saves the world and goes and gets drunk. You know what I like? I shouldn't like that part of the story, but it just reminds me that all these characters on their best day are just shadows. They're just little flat, two-dimensional things on the ground so that when you get to Christ, you can see that they lead you back to him. I don't want to be like Noah. I want to be like Jesus. And I'm going to let everything about Noah's life that was like Jesus, I'm going to imitate Noah so I can be more like him. You see that? That's the process. I want to honor Jesus through that. And that leads us to the Christian story. A faith that responds to God the Father and God the Son. Do you need to respond to God the Father and God? I just wonder if he's done enough. I wonder if he's kind enough and patient enough. I wonder if it hurts you enough to know that if you're living in sin, he feels that every time. And if so, do you understand who he sent to make that right? I'm not telling you to make it right. I'm asking you if you know who he sent to make it right. It was none other than his son. He wants to make that right. But you have to obey his will. Are you willing to do that? If you are, then come now as we stand and sing.